Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome to episode 38 of Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add vintage vibes to your modern life. We're your hosts, Jackie
and Gonzalo. Thank you guys for joining us today. So last season we did a show on the impact of Star Wars, so we thought we would add to the suite of movies by talking about another mid-century and thriller classic, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960. But first, before we talk about the week, if you are liking our podcast and want to get in touch, we now have a new feature called Fan Mail. So on your preferred podcast platform, just go to any of our episodes and you'll see a send us a text message feature at the very top of our description. Here you can send us a message, and don't worry, we don't see your phone number. It's all secure. We don't share any of that stuff.
So if you send us a message, we'll read it on the pod. So go ahead and send us some texts.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, let's get on with the show. So Gonzalo, how was your week?
I don't have much more to report from last week because I have not yet traveled, which if you listen to our episode about hot dogs, you know that I have an upcoming trip. Hasn't happened yet. But also I am a teacher in the middle of summer vacation, so I really don't have anything to do, which is kind of great. So I'm just going to run you down through what my typical day looks like, which don't be too jealous, but I wake up whenever I wake up. We no longer have any summer school or any of that stuff. So if I wake up at 7, I'm up at 7. If I don't wake up till 9 o'clock in the morning, I get to sleep in. And then I do nothing for a while. And then I'll usually draw. And then I go back to doing nothing for a little while longer. And then I go to the gym. And that's pretty much all I do. So I don't have anything interesting. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not an interesting person at all. But how about you? What was your week like?
My week is good. I'm enjoying my summer as well by pretending it isn't anymore, I guess. So, like, now that my birthday shenanigans are over and now I'm back to having not a lot of plans. But so the most exciting thing that's happened lately is that Halloween stuff is starting to show up in stores already. And the best thing that has ever happened to 1960s aesthetic enthusiasts happened at Michael's this year. They released a hippie Halloween collection, and it's all this home decor that is like a mashup of mod flower power prints and Halloween. So it's like pink and orange flower power prints with like a bat on it, or velvet pumpkins and like various shades of yellow and pink and orange, and disco ball stuff. Like, it's crazy. It's like the best aesthetic I've ever seen. It's a little expensive, but Michael's does have regular coupons. But I definitely ran and bought the flower power bat pillow and a couple velvet pumpkins. They also have some like neon pink and orange like skeletons and coffin shelves with flower power inlays. It's just like the coolest aesthetic. I'm so here for it.
It is very mid-century. I've seen pictures.
It rocks. But the fact that Halloween is in stores now means that people are looking forward to spooky season. So that is a good transition into today's topic.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about the 1960 movie Psycho. Have you seen it before, Jackie?
No, unfortunately not. I'm working through the classics, but I haven't gotten around to this one yet.
So I actually had not seen it before researching for this show episode either, right? So don't feel too bad. So really, this podcast comes to you thanks to me wanting to watch a movie during my summer of nothing. So if you have seen Psycho, then you know what it's about. If you have not seen it yet, spoilers ahead. Even though it feels weird saying spoilers for a movie that is from the 1960s. But again, we're talking about the 1960 film, not the remake from 98, which I have also not seen. So some basic info on this movie. Again, it's a classic film. It was produced and directed by famed director Alfred Hitchcock. based on the 1959 novel titled Psycho by Robert Bloch. I found it very interesting that the book came out in 1959 and then the movie comes out in 1960.
Yeah, that's a quick turnaround. I didn't even know it was a book.
Yeah. So the movie stars Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, Janet Leigh, I won't say Janet Leigh.
I think it's pronounced Lee.
Yeah. As Marion Crane, as well as Vera Miles, John Gavin, and Martin Balsam as Lila Crane, Sam Loomis, and investigator Milton Arbogast, respectively. It was released on June 16th, 1960, in New York City at first, and eventually on September 8th throughout the USA. And the original budget for this movie was $806,947 1960s dollars.
Which is $8.5 million today.
Yes, but it grossed $50 million at the box office. So,
which is $530 million today, which is crazy.
So that is an insane return on investment.
Good for them.
Yes.
So we should say, however, that this is not an episode for people who have not seen Psycho. Gonzalo, you want to go through the plot?
Yeah, I'll go through it. So again, yeah, if you want to go stop, watch it, we'll wait. And we'll be here whenever you're ready. So go watch the movie and then come back and then you'll be like, oh, that's right. I know what he's talking about. So real quickly, the movie starts off with a scandalous scene in which the character Marion Crane is seen in bed with her boyfriend/lover, Sam Loomis. It might sound weird that I started this plot summary with this, but it's important for later. So Marion and Sam are discussing their marriage, or really the lack thereof, and it so happens that Sam's debts are delaying it. Marion happens to be a secretary, and we see her at work being handed $40,000 in cash from her employer and tasked with taking it to the bank. So what's a girl who's got a boyfriend that can't afford to get married to do when presented with the solution to their debt problem?
Oh no, does she steal the money?
She steals the money. Yes. So Marion steals the money. She goes home faking a headache and then drives away, and then is seen by the employer not at home where she should be resting, but instead in her car driving from Phoenix, Arizona to Fairvale, California, which is where Sam Loomis lives. So a heavy rainstorm forces Marion to stop at the Bates Motel for the night, where she encounters the proprietor, Norman Bates. Bates invites her, after checking her in, invites her over to his house, which is a great mansion which overlooks the motel. And we see Marion overhearing Norman arguing with his mother back at the house. So after a short dinner at the motel, where Marion discovers Norman's passions for taxidermy, she retires to her room, and this is where we get that famous shower stabbing scene. So as Marion is showering, a shadowed figure comes into the bathroom and stabs Marion in the shower. This is the famous scene, which we'll talk more about later. Norman discovers the dead body of Marion and then covers up the murder by disposing of her body, her car, her belongings, including the stolen cash. And then we meet Sam Loomis in California and Lila Crane, who is Marion's sister, who is looking for her sister, who's looking for Marion, right? And we're also introduced at this point to investigator Milton Arbogast. So Arbogast is investigating the stealing of the money and eventually traces Marion to the Bates Motel. He interviews Norman Bates, telephones Sam and Lila to let them know that she stopped at the Bates Motel. And upon attempting to speak to Mrs. Bates at the house, he enters the manor and is stabbed to death by Mrs. Bates. Sam and Lila pursue the lead set by Arbogast by visiting the sheriff, who explained that Mrs. Bates has been dead from murder-suicide for 10 years. And this contradicts all the characters so far who have, quote, seen Mrs. Bates through the windows. Sam and Lila go back to the motel, and while Sam distracts Norman, Lila goes into the house, where she makes her way to the cellar and discovers the mummified body of Mrs. Bates.
This scene is actually famous, where she's sitting on the swivel chair and it's not a live person.
Yes, this is the famous scene where she's sitting on a swivel chair, and like Lila will come in and pushes the chair, and like it turns and it's not a live person. It's a mummy. So yeah, Lila screams, and here we see Norman Bates wearing women's clothes and a wig, running in, trying to stab her, and is stopped by Sam. And this pretty much ends the movie. I know that we didn't cover every single bit bit in peace. But this is the end of the movie, and it's set at the police station. And a psychiatrist explains that Norman killed his mother and lover out of jealousy, and unable to bear the guilt, mummified his mother's corpse and began treating it as if it was alive. And the psychiatrist concludes that this quote mother person is Norman's submerged personality that takes over every time that Norman is attracted to a woman. So a mother will take over and kill the woman. And the last scene shows Norman in a jail cell with a voiceover of Mrs. Bates suggesting that his personality, or that this personality, is taking over Norman, and that she claims Norman was bad from the beginning. And that's the quick and dirty version of the movie.
Wow. Well, as great as this movie is, I'm sure it had a lot of instant and long-lasting impact on the cinematic industry.
Yeah. So before the 60s, starting actually in the 1930s, movies produced in the United States followed what's called the production code, or as is also known as Hays Code. And these were a set of industry guidelines for self-censorship of motion pictures. Some of the rules included no pointed profanity, no suggestive nudity in fact or in silhouette, no illegal traffic in drugs, no inference of sex, nothing related to sex and facts, right?
Wow.
Yeah. But as we mentioned earlier, the impact they had in the immediate impact they had is that this is an unprecedented, it was unprecedented to show the opening scene displaying lovers sharing a bed, insinuating that this couple had just had relations, right? This is a big change in the movie making from 1950s to 1960s, and it would have been taboo and against the code to show unmarried couples sharing the same bed. Some of the impact that this had on the 1960s is that it's a great example of how movies and film were moving towards less adherence to censorship rules at the time. For a film that became as popular as Psycho to show breaking this code is one of the reasons that led to the end of this code by 1968 and its replacement by the MPAA rating system. The movie received mixed reviews on its initial release. It was criticized for inspiring other filmmakers to show gory content. So we could say it almost directly inspired the 1963 film Blood Feast, which is considered the first splatter film.
Well,
Yeah, so Psycho led to the creation of the subgenre slasher flick, and it inspired the horror movies in the 60s that would then create this horror renaissance of the 1970s.
yes, and it's not just that movies are now breaking the rules when it comes to production codes. So mid-century horror films were actually almost completely all science fiction related or impacted in some way. The main common theme in horror movies were monster movies, so something to be feared as a monster, not a human. Most of the time, it's some sort of science or science experiment that creates the creature that is then to be feared. So, like Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954 or The Blob in 1958. Other influences were showing the dangers of radiation, playing on the mid-century fear of atomic war, or alien invasion, which is playing on the mid-century fear of alien space, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Psycho changed this with the famous shower scene. The abrupt stabbing changes what makes the horror movies scary/fearful. There's no alien invasion, no science experiment gone wrong. What makes the movie scary is that a human is responsible for the fear, a human that requires no radiation or experiment going wrong. This is a huge shift because it makes the fear of horror movies real, not science-based.
Yes. Psycho also broke the distance of horror films. In the mid-century, the horror moviegoer was separated from reality because of how fictional the monsters were, right? How generic the characters were. There's no such thing as an actual blob, essentially. Psycho broke this distance by showing the realistic details of scenes like the toilet flushing, right? Small details of the characters, basically making the movies more realistic, kind of subconsciously makes you think that what's happening in the movie can happen in real life, right? So people left the cinema feeling more vulnerable after seeing this realism in the movie. Basically, Psycho was the beginning of a movement that took the American moviegoer's fear away from the monster or nuclear attack or things that were somewhere fat-fetched, and instead told people that the real threat was human, maybe even your normal-looking neighbor, because anyone could have a neighbor that looked like Norman Bates and not even know of the real monster within. Right? It hints at the fact that the real monster lives inside of man. No one who's seen Psycho can think of the movie without also thinking about the famous scene. And actually, I could go as far as say there's no one who even has heard of the word Psycho might not be able to think of this famous scene. So this is the shower scene.
Hmm.
It's the famous murder of Marion Crane that is the most important scene in the movie and has become one of the best known in all of cinema. The total finished scene runs for about 3 minutes total, including the setup. But it's made of 78 pieces of film, 78 shots, and 52 cuts of film. Because remember, this is back when we used film and not digital. The famous soundtrack of the scene is a piece called The Murder, composed by Bernard Herrmann, and it's made up of screeching string instruments, violins, and cellos. And if we were
That's
to
what it
play,
is.
yes, I know, I never noticed what it was, but this is that noise. The sound of the knife stabbing Marion was made by stabbing a knife into a casaba melon.
Cool.
And who would have thought that we were talking food talk in this episode?
Yep.
The blood in the scene is Hershey's chocolate syrup,
Cool.
which is like an urban legend, but it actually is true. Myths that come from the scene. So there is like a controversy that says that there was a body double. Now Lee, who played Marion, did not want to be nude, and that's why there's a body double. There's also a myth that another director took over this scene, but this one's debunked real easily because why would Alfred Hitchcock, being such the perfectionist he was, leave someone to direct this scene for him? And also some miscellaneous things like the water was cold to make Lee's scream more realistic, which has also been debunked because apparently it took several days to film this scene,
Oh,
even though it was 78 cuts of film. So she's like, I was comfortable the whole time. But the impact the scene has on the mid-century and on the cinematic industry. So Lee was so affected that she never took a shower again. In interviews, she's been quoted saying that unless a bath was not an option at all, if she had to shower, she would lock the bathroom door and keep the curtain or the shower door open.
wow.
Yeah, there is some nudity in the scene, or really some partial nudity, which is kind of what was going against the production code. Again, we talked about the impact of that, I guess, betrayal of the production code was. Um, the scene was also cause for many countries to slightly modify the movie before releasing it in their countries. So England required the stabbing sounds and visible nude shots removed. In New Zealand, Bates seen washing his hands afterwards was deemed, quote, disgusting. Um, Ireland banned the whole movie until 1961, where it was resubmitted following the omission of 47 feet of film.
Dang.
Um, but this scene, which is again those 78 shots and 52 cuts of film, are also important because of the impact they had on editing. So it pioneered what's called quick cutting, and these scenes that were filmed all suggest graphic violence without actually showing it. It never actually shows the murder beyond split-second scenes where the knife arguably does not even go into or cut Marion. There's no actual killing done.
Cool.
Some fun facts about Psycho. So Alfred Hitchcock's cameo, which was a signature occurrence in most of his films, right, happens outside of Marion Crane's office. He's seen through a window wearing a Stetson hat. I completely missed it on my first watch. And again, the movie was filmed entirely using 50 and 35 millimeter cameras, which served to involve the audience in the film because it is the most similar to how the human eye sees. So it's like if you're there watching it happen.
Cool. Well, that is fascinating stuff. And as we move into the more recent past, in 1998, the film was reviewed by critic Robert Ebert, explaining that what makes the movie immortal is that it connects with humans' four fears: fear that we might impulsively commit a crime, fear of the police, fear of becoming the victim of a madman, and fear of disappointing our mothers.
Yes. Also, I didn't realize those were humans' four fears, but
Yeah. I mean, mine's like snakes, embarrassing myself in public, I guess murder.
well, through today, really, this movie is continuously being discussed and used in popular culture I found a very interesting Reddit thread that was interesting because the Redditors were presumably, it doesn't say, but younger generation who had recently discovered this movie and were amazed by it. As in, like, the new generation is now watching this and be like, oh my God, have you seen this movie? I can't believe no one's talking about this, but people are talking about it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been on several lists of movies. For example, it's number 8 on BBC's 100 Greatest American Films, number 8 on Empire's 100 Best Movies of All Time, number 3 on the Rolling Stones magazine 10 Best Horror Movies of All Time. It's also been highlighted as important by many giants of the industry, such as Entertainment Weekly, the National Society of Film Critics, and the British Film Institute, among others. It was nominated for many Academy Awards, winning none. In 1992, the Library of Congress marked the movie as, quote, culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant.
Wow.
And was then selected for preservation by the National Film Registry. In 2010, the Guardian newspaper ranked it as the best horror film of all time. And in 2014, Rolling Stone magazine, once again, named it as the third best horror movie of all time. So after Hitchcock died, 3 sequels followed the 1960 classic. Psycho 2 in 1983, Psycho 3 in 1986, and Psycho 4, The Beginning in 1990. This was actually a made-for-TV prequel movie written by Joseph Stefano, who wrote the original 1960s screenplay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and all 3 of these sequels/prequels have Anthony Perkins returning as Norman Bates. And all are considered inferior to the original Psycho. In 1998, a shot-for-shot remake was created in color, starring Vince Vaughn, Julianne Moore, and Anne Heche. And I can't believe I have not seen this.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I actually didn't know that they remade it.
I don't know how I feel about it either, but Vince Vaughn and Julianne Moore, and Anne Heche for that matter, like, they're fairly big names for late 90s. So, lastly, from 2013 to 2017, the series Bates Motel, starring Freddie Highmore and Vera Farmiga as Norman Bates and Norma Bates, respectively, so Mrs. Bates, depicting a modern-day prequel of the original movie, which was really good really good series. Psycho also had a really interesting impact on mental health. So at the end of the movie, right, we discovered that Norman Bates was talking on his mother's persona, right, as a representation of Norman's mental state. So in the mid-century, this was classified as like general madness, but it shows the importance of understanding disorders, such as what we now call dissociative identity disorder. Unfortunately, it does also have this like stigma, or encourage this stigma, that some villainous intent comes from those suffering from mental health conditions. It's the whole impact of Psycho on mental state could be its own episode. But we did want to just quickly mention it because it is important impact to not just the cinematic industry, but our lives today.
Yeah.
And lastly, guys, if you want to watch it, or maybe you have
Or rewatch it if you're watching.
Yeah. It is currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
Yay. So now that we're caught up to the present, it's time for our etiquette segment. So since I brought the etiquette segment last week, Gonzalo, what do you have today?
So today we are taking the etiquette from chapter 42 of Emily Vanderbilt's complete book on etiquette from 1963, and it's titled Gracious Living Without Servants. In this chapter, Amy discusses what she calls the changing of domestic employment, basically how high wages and, quote, often quite inferior performance, end quote, is leading to a world where the live-in servant will be rare. How the rise of new equipment such as electric dishwashers, power vacuums, freezers, etc. are making the mistress of the house being able to handle the household duties. She starts with talking about like the morning and how you have to start the day with good intention, right? So it's important to start the day without hurry and tension. So it helps to set the breakfast table the night before. Prepare orange juice, prepare the grapefruit and other fruit the night before. She claims that if you cover the fruit, you won't lose as many of the vitamins, which I thought was hilarious. Morning menus should also be decided upon the night before so that the, quote, sleepy early morning preparation of the breakfast can be more or less automatic. You should assemble the things that you need the night before, right? It's best to avoid the last minute search for articles such as mittens, school books, that kind of stuff. So assemble the night before, or at least check where they are. Know where things are so that you're not running around in the morning. Everything should have a place, but as Amy says, it, quote, takes years of training to get children to put things back. So it's certainly not a good idea to count on everything being where it should be, which we are back to Amy's sassiness in this book. But basically, get ready for the morning the night before. And then the whole family should arise early to allow for a leisurely start of the day. Regarding laundry, if done at home, it is easier to do some laundry each day instead of allowing it to collect, so that a whole morning must be devoted to the laundry project.
Man, this is good advice.
Huh?
I said, man, this is good advice, but I'm good.
Ironing tends to collect, so an automatic ironer might be the solution. Or some neighborhoods may have people who will pick up the ironing for you and then return it later on, like a laundry service. Regarding cleaning, the cleaning routine, as she calls it, the kitchen should never be left untidy while other chores get prior attention because it's the heart of the house. So start in the kitchen and then proceed to bed making. After the bedrooms are tidied, then move on to the living room. Dusting and floors should come last of everything. So one room should be chosen each day for a thorough cleaning. And to do this, you prepare the room as much as possible by moving furniture away from walls, removing ornaments from shelves, taking pictures down, all that kind of stuff. Clean the walls, clean the woodwork first. Everything washable should be done as time allows. And then the floors are done last because as you clean, dust and dirt drop to the floor, right? When complete, you must reassemble the room instead of leaving it for later. And she also talks a little bit about what she calls sketchy days. And on sketchy days, the minimum household work should include meal getting, which I took to assume that, before we had fridges and stuff, or before they were common, really, you had to go to the market every day to get the food that you're making for dinner, right? So that's a priority. Dishwashing, bed making, bathroom cleaning, right? Also stuff that should happen. And Amy says to neglect any of these until the day's end means coming home to a, quote, uninviting house, and usually a feeling that a free day is hardly worth it. So, Jackie, what do you think?
I wish I was the kind of person who did this. That is my main takeaway. I think really this is all very good advice, and I do some of these things some of the time. I don't do all these things all the time. But I kind of wish that I did, so I think we should keep it because I think we should strive for this kind of perfection.
I fully agree, especially because the morning thing, like the preparing for the morning the night before, I try so hard to do that because I'm up at 4:45 in the morning. I don't want to rush out of the house. I actually get up with leisurely time, as Amy says. But I also know that I will leave my house no less than 3 times every morning. Because I drive out of the garage and I close the garage door, and then I start to pull away. Oh, I forgot something, and I open the garage door. I come back into the house, and then I go to the car and I close the garage door, and I drive down the street and go, oh my god, I forgot if I close the door or not. So I drive back to the house, make sure that the garage door is closed. Like, it's ridiculous. And if I follow this etiquette rule of having everything ready to go, I wouldn't have to go through that dance.
Yeah. I do some of this, but I wish I did more frequent loads of laundry, honestly. That's why I was like, man, this is good advice, like while you were in the laundry section. Because I'm the kind of person who just waits until I have no clothes, and then I wash everything. And she's right. Then the whole morning's devoted to the laundry project, and there goes your whole Saturday,
Yep.
So, I mean, this is great advice. I think we should keep it, and I think that everyone, even if you can't accomplish this, just like we can't, wanting to, I think, is still going to contribute to you at least making some small improvements to your daily routines.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So let's give it the mid-century stamp of approval. And with that, it looks like we have landed the plane. Thank you guys all for listening today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. This is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions. Send us a DM anytime. And you can also find us on YouTube, also at MCL Podcast.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye!
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.